This is Nikki Naab-Levy, and you are listening to Results Not Typical, a podcast that challenges the traditional narrative of Pilates and fitness while tackling misinformation that is keeping you from reaching your fitness goals. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Results Not Typical. I have Anna Hartman with me today. She's an athletic trainer and the owner of Movement Rev, and we are going to dig into this idea of what does it actually mean to train like an athlete? Because she works with professional athletes, as in those people who make those millions and millions of dollars in that massive industry. So I thought she was the perfect person to kind of have this conversation around all of these things. So welcome, Anna, and thanks for having this conversation with me today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super happy to be here.
So, yeah. So before we just kind of dive in, because we'll do that pretty quick, I always like to give people a moment just to kind of introduce themselves and talk a little bit about who you are and what you do, because I think athletic trainer is really nebulous and your work is pretty specific and actually pretty nerdy. So,
yes, I'm happy to introduce myself and tell you who I am. So, first off, the profession of athletic training is it's generic words, so that's what makes it pretty confusing for people too, because the lay person hears athletic trainer and they think personal trainer, like someone who trains someone to be an athlete or athletic, and it's actually not that. It is a allied healthcare provider. So we athletic trainers are first responders, rehabilitators, sort of run the gamut, almost act as physician extenders. So we do work under a supervising physician. That doesn't mean that they are like in our radius of view. It just means that we're part of the sports medicine team. So the most classic example of what an athletic trainer is if you are watching a sporting event and somebody gets hurt on the field, on the court, on the track, whatever it may be, the people who run out to take care of them, that is the athletic trainer. So most professional sports teams or even high school teams, college teams employ athletic trainers as their first line of duty for injuries and illness prevention. So same thing, if the athlete gets COVID or gets the flu, right? Like the stomach flu before competition, the first person they check in with and are like, what should I do? Is the athletic trainer. And then the athletic trainer decides how that person needs to be triaged. Do they need to go to the doctor? Do they need to go to the emergency room? Do we need to call 911? Do we need to start emergency care right on the spot? Or is it an injury that can be evaluated, like a physical injury that can be evaluated by the athletic trainer and then treated by the athletic trainer? And that treatment might include hands-on things. It might include modalities. It might include exercise. So it sort of runs the gamut of healthcare, really. So that's the first thing of what an athletic trainer is. How I am different than a traditional athletic trainer. So that's like the traditional role of athletic trainer. Because our scope of practice is so big, athletic training, especially nowadays, you can kind of niche down a little bit into what aspect of care that you are most passionate about. In my entire career, I've been most passionate about two things: working with professional athletes, meaning athletes who play in the NFL, NBA, MLB, PGA, like the traditional professional athlete. And then also, I am most passionate about rehabilitation or preventative movement and performance therapy. So, and then I further sort of niched into that space of rehab and preventative care, manual therapy, and movement combination. And I have, over the last 8 years, integrated osteopathic medicine and philosophies into my approach. So my approach is a very like holistic point of view, where I am constantly viewing the athlete's body in front of me as the wisest person in the room and listening to it and deciding what it needs in order to heal itself and perform at a high level, as opposed to putting that athlete in a box of quote unquote what they should be doing or should not be doing, or how they should be moving, or, if they have knee pain, their hip, we need to look at their hip or whatever it may be. So I've sort of niched down a couple to make what I do at Movement Rev a very unique approach. And so I travel with professional athletes throughout their seasons. I'm often on the road, working with just a couple people because there's only one of me and only so much time in the day. And then I also provide professional education to people in the realm of sports medicine, wellness, fitness. So,
yes.
Quick intro.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that. I think already people are maybe starting to hopefully think about sort of like how what you just described is so different than how I would say pop culture describes and the fitness industry describes training like an athlete. Because my favorite example to throw under the bus is frankly Tom Brady, right? Tom Brady with his wacky diet, and as if you drink enough water, you can't get sunburned or whatever it is that guy is saying. And I've always been like, but you're not Tom Brady. You don't have Tom Brady's money. You don't have Tom Brady's body. You don't have Tom Brady's injury history. You don't have Tom Brady's needs. So trying to live like Tom Brady is really wild. And also athleticism and like true being like an athlete, like a professional athlete, is not health. And it's not always health promoting. That stuff is really hard on your body. So do you want to maybe speak to sort of, for the sake of this conversation, I think defining what it means to be an athlete? I think anyone can use that word, but I think that word gets thrown around in a way that ends up being not always terribly helpful for people when they actually start trying to identify as an athlete, or they start thinking, I'm going to train like an athlete because I read a magazine article on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, when people think they want to train like the athlete, they see the athlete and they see their body and they see their strength and power and they want to be like them, and this is even going like why so many people identify as an athlete when they don't play in the NFL or the NBA, right? Like there's a lot of people in the world that are like, yeah, I'm an athlete. And it's because like back in the day, right, in when Nike first signed Michael Jordan, like one of their like slogans for selling shoes and selling the product was like, I want to be like Mike. Like everybody wanted to be like him. They wanted to look like him. They wanted to jump like him. They wanted to play basketball like him. And the sales industry really like leaned into that and made everybody think like, if you can buy this piece of clothing or this shoe, then you too can get the, effects of how good this athlete is. And that's like the funny, I think that's like the most ironic thing about it, is because like you said, many of the things that the athletes do in order to perform at that high level is actually not so great for their health. Like look at football players in general, playing football, not even football, but impact sports, and sports that are accelerate and decelerate at rapid times are more associated with CTE and brain problems in a long-term health standpoint. And so those athletes are making a choice, whether they realize it or not, to participate in those sports means that they might be shortening their life or severely affecting the quality of their life, right? And so that's like the ironic thing too, is a lot of the choices that the athletes make and a lot of the things that they do for training are not health promoting. They're not life prolonging. They're actually choosing to do things to manipulate their body in order to perform at the highest level. Does that make it bad or good? That's not up for me to understand, but that's when I'm working with my athletes, I always want to make sure I've given them all the information about the choices they are making in their training and the performance and their nutrition and the things they're, the supplements they're taking, the natural injections and things that they're doing from all these like regenerative medicine type things. Like I'm trying to get them to understand that everything comes with a risk versus reward, and training's just like that too. And so it's like, sometimes if you're training like an athlete, you're doing like high intensity, you're kind of ignoring general rules around overtraining and progressively loading the body and taking the time in order to achieve a certain goal, So it's like athletes too, like sometimes their training window is really short. They have to make a choice in the off season. They've got like 2 to 3 months in the off season where they need to rehab all the crap that happened during the season and then prepare for the next season. And so they have to skip a lot of the process sometimes. One, their nervous system and fascial system was just genetically a little superior, and it can have a little bit more wiggle room to get away with that without getting hurt or without having an illness or injury disease. But also, like, they just are good about ignoring how their body feels to perform at that high level. And so it's like, that's not how, like, I don't know about anybody else, but I want my body to feel good. And so it might take me 8 to 12 months to rehab a knee injury that I got like jumping rope. Right. But it's like, well, that's the luxury of being not a professional athlete, is I have nothing but time to make my knee feel better so that my knee feels better for 50 years, as opposed to these athletes. They're like, quick fix. So I can go play this weekend and I can make $1 million and provide for my family. And yeah, 10 years down the road, I probably won't be able to walk without pain. That is the risk they are accepting for the amount of money they are receiving to play these sports, which is mind blowing to me that people are doing this because they want to train like the athletes and participating in, not saying CrossFit is bad, because I'm not, like, CrossFit is not bad, but sometimes the mentality in CrossFit is to be like an athlete and like push through pain and do things that are not the smartest, like very high risk. And it's a super low reward. Even if you're a CrossFitter that is competing and making money, you're not making that much money. So it's like, how much are you selling your body parts for? Basically, it's like, that's the ironic part. So that's, I think, what it means. And well, and then the funny part too is, most of the time when people are like, oh, you must be able to get to do so many cool things with the athletes when you're doing exercises with them. And I'm like, no, what I do with them is the foundation, because they need it. We all need the foundational stuff. And there is a higher reward in our body for doing the foundational stuff and doing the rest things than there is to do the fancy, high risk, ton of work things. And so that's like the most mind boggling to me, is like, if people only knew what I did with my athletes, they'd be like, that's it. But it's because the simple stuff done savagely well works.
Yeah, there's so many good points there in what you brought up. Alongside of, my brain just keeps going back to like the dichotomy of stupid that is fitness marketing.
Yes.
Right. Like because that was the thing, is like, I taught like this really kind of high intensity, I'm just going to say aggressive group fitness. It wasn't even CrossFit, but it had a very CrossFit mindset in my early 20s. And all of the marketing and all of the things you were supposed to say and everything that everyone did was like, train like an athlete. And it was basically beat the crap out of yourself. And I very quickly was like, we're all in chronic pain for less than $25 an hour.
Yeah.
Right. Like the PT bill is like 5 times that easily. Yeah. And that's like not even the good PT bill. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, this is ludicrous. And this is the thing, is you would think we would have gotten away from it by now. Like, I'm in my mid to late 30s, but like that marketing and that messaging and that mindset is still there. And what I just heard you say, there were so many good points, but to kind of recap it or circle us back, one of them is you were like, look, we're not doing big, fancy, sexy, exciting things here. We're spending all of our time on that restorative stuff, because that foundational restorative stuff, and I'm going to have you dig into that, what that even looks like or means in a moment, is the base for everything. And the other thing I heard you say was that, like, if you were smart about your body and smart about your health, unless you wouldn't actually, quote unquote, train like an athlete, you would give yourself more time to progress, more time to rest, more time to recover. You would actually do things slower because you'd recover better, especially when coming back from an injury, and you'd feel a lot better, and it'd be a lot more sustainable for the long term. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. Yes, that is absolutely correct. And so, I mean, I think the positive, like if I were to spin like the slogan, train like an athlete, in a positive way, I'd say train like an athlete means to be an active participant in your healthcare and to make decisions that lead to increased activity and increased self-care. But at the same time, we're going back to the same points but that includes rest, and that includes regeneration type activities, and that includes like slow progressions and that kind of thing. So, it is just the athletes don't have the luxury of the timeline that we have, because their careers, the average length of a career in the NFL is 3.5 years. And so it's like, it might take, if somebody has ACL surgery, it might take somebody a year to 3 years to actually have their knee not swell up after every time they play. And so it's like, they don't have the luxury of that. So they just have to deal with their knee getting unhappy and swollen every time they play, even though, yes, they have their strength back and relatively their power back within 6 months. Yeah. Yep, absolutely. But doesn't mean that all the physiology is done. No, physiology takes a long time to turn over. Our skeleton takes 7 years to turn itself over. So if you fracture a bone, is there a callus that heals over and gives you enough strength in order to weight bear on that bone again after 8 to 12 weeks? Yes, more than likely, absolutely. But is it still going through the throes of healing for 12 months, 18 months, 7 years? Yes, it is. So it's like, if you're an athlete, that's why you're constantly like putting a Band-Aid on things. And so it's like crazy to think that people want to do that when they don't have to and are not getting paid to do it.
Yeah, they're falling for the marketing instead of learning the information. And I would love to know sort of, because again, I think sometimes this idea of train like an athlete, I just imagine like someone with their shirt off, like gnawing on a chicken bone, doing like pull-ups or something like that, right? It's just, this is sort of like what we end up seeing, which is wild. So what does a session actually look like, do you find, in terms of like what your athletes usually need when you work with them?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like let's say like what a normal day for an athlete is too, because I think that's important to consider too, is like we might have, like, you're lucky as a normal person if you have 3 hours of the day, I'd say, to spend on your physical health. Like 3 hours is a lot. An athlete, like 3 hours would be like an easy rest day for them. They're spending like 8 to 12 hours a day solely focused on things around their body. And that might be, that starts the day with like waking up and, well, number one, for a lot of them, it's eating enough calories to maintain their weight or put on more muscle, which, ironically, again, people who are training like athletes, they tend to restrict their calories significantly, which puts a very high strain on the nervous system and your hormones, and then just wrecks you in the first place. So that's like number one. Number two is they, are getting treatment on a regular basis from people like me or with their team, so they're dedicating like, let's say 2 hours a day for that. And then some of them go and get like nutritional IVs and that sort of stuff. And that takes time. And then they go and they do their workout, and their workout probably takes about 2 hours. And that workout consists of, active warm up, and then weightlifting, and then cardio. And then they might go to their team meetings. That is like a couple hours a day, running, looking over plays and doing whatever. Right. And then they get a lunch break. And then in the afternoon, they're going like practicing. And then after practice, they're doing treatment again. And then they're watching film. And then they're, like their day is packed. Like it's not like they're lounging around between games. They're like on the go, on their feet most of the time. And they're working on their bodies, I'd say at minimum 6 to 8 hours a day. And the other 4 of those hours are going over the actual game and film and strategy, that kind of thing. So they're practicing or training or rehabbing every day, 6 to 8 hours a day. So it's like, you can't do that as a normal person because it's not your job. This is literally their job, to take care of their bodies. And ironically, it's still not enough time to give the amount of time needed to rehabilitate most injuries. So that's part of it. So, but what it would look like with me, specifically, I go in and I evaluate the athlete, and I do a combination evaluation where I do like this osteopathic evaluation, which actually gives me a good idea of how their nervous system is. And if their nervous system is in the zone of being more balanced, which means they have access to that parasympathetic response, which is where the regeneration and recovery and the self-healing abilities really come into play. And that's why that rest piece is so important. We need that part of the nervous system in order to have that self-healing and repair and recovery and regeneration piece going on. So in addition to that, I do an evaluation from an orthopedic standpoint, like what's their mobility like? Are they having pain somewhere? What's generating that pain? What's the tissue that's generating pain? What's the movement generating the pain? And then I'll do treatment based on those two things and bring their nervous system back into a rest, regeneration, recovery mode. And then I'll do their orthopedic type treatment, which may or may not consist of exercises that are the foundation, right? Like breathing exercises and ankle mobility stuff and learning how to move their hip and their pelvis in relationship to each other. General core stability exercises, feeling that reflexive connection in their body when they shift their weight forward on their feet or when they load their axial skeleton with enough load, right? And so those little supplemental exercises that I eventually put in their workout. That's another difference between that and general population is I don't tend to prescribe a ton more exercises because they're already doing so much, right? Because the recipe really for success, and this is from my previous previous job at Exos, Mark Versagen, the founder, his like mantra was work plus rest equals success. And every athlete we come across, they do the work part really well already. We don't need to usually add more to them. We need to actually take away or add in rest activities, get their nervous system to switch, and then that's going to be successful. So if they're not having this level of success they want to, right, they want to get to here, then it's not adding work, it's actually adding the next one, adding rest. And then that's going to elevate it. And so, yeah, so that's, you know, what we're doing a lot of. And I think that is like the hard missing piece for most people, athletes and general population, is the rest piece. Unless you are someone who is not working out, then you probably need to work out. Like weightlifting is important, strength training is important, but if you are in the category of you want to train like an athlete, you're probably already doing that part. So you need the rest. Even if you're sedentary and not training, sometimes you are so in such a unbalanced nervous system state, you often need the rest part too first to tap into a little bit before you, or as you're adding in the training piece as well. So it's like, it's just, again, you got to look at who's in front of you and what they need, as opposed to fitting in a box and trying to be like everybody else.
Yeah. And something you brought up that I think is so crucial, that is so misunderstood, is this piece about the nervous system and how the nervous system plays into recovery, how the nervous system plays into injury prevention, how the nervous system plays into strength gains, because this is sort of like the mythos, if you will, of the fitness industry, is it's like, go hard all the time, 24/7, never take a break. And right. I'm like, right, but you have this thing called a nervous system, and it really, if you ignore it, bad things happen, because it really is the governor of everything else. And now there's so much more. I mean, it's not even new research anymore. That's just like, yeah, there's like this point where it's like some is good and too much is bad. And then you kick off all this inflammation, and then you actually feel worse, and you actually see decreases in all the things you're trying to get improvements on when you push it too far. And I think most of us are living in a really high stress state, whether or not we're moving around or exercising all the time. So do you want to speak to kind of what the nervous system is and what you mean when you sort of refer to this idea of having your nervous system in the right state to be ready to do those things? Because I don't know if that's something that everyone's aware of.
All right. So The nervous system. So our nervous system is our autonomic nervous system is what I'm talking about. It is really the part of our body that is telling all of our organs how to react to the environment. And it's literally wired for survival. So we're sort of always in this state of like trying to stay alive. And we have so you have basically two parts of the autonomic nervous system. You have the survival mode, which is the commonly called the sympathetic nervous system, which is fight, flight, or freeze responses. And then you have the parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest, digest, recovery, reproduction. The interesting thing, well, like I said, is we're always sort of primitively, we're wired to be always in survival mode. Our parasympathetic nervous system, part of it evolved with our biology to actually dampen this survival response to be like, you're cool. Like there's no need to run away. There's no threat. And so this is actually the break. So if we didn't have our parasympathetic nervous system, our heart rate would be really high, right? So what makes our resting heart rates like 60 to 70 beats per minute is this parasympathetic break. It's called the vagal break that is giving the message to the heart, we're cool, you can relax, no need to pump a lot of blood. We can just have a minimal amount of blood pumping through us because we're just sitting watching TV. Like, cool. That's why when you get stressed, when you have a lot of stress in your life, so it's funny that we say get stressed, but when you have when you are stressed out, people who are stressed, their resting heart rate is above 80 to 80 beats per minute. So if your resting heart rate is like 85, 90, chances are you're a person that has like feeling a lot of stress on a regular basis. This is why part of the reason why babies' heart rates are so much higher when they're born than us adults. And as the baby gets older, their heart rate starts getting lower and lower. And that's because their parasympathetic nervous system starts increasing its vagal tone. Part of the reason it starts increasing the vagal tone is because it starts to co-regulate with the parent. The parent helps to calm the baby, and sort of our nervous systems speak to each other, and they start to get more and more of that vagal break, right? So part of that co-regulation, that parasympathetic response or that stimulation is interacting socially, talking to friends, like seeing facial expressions, hearing like your mom's voice, like a very like calming sounds, things like vocalization and humming, longer exhale breaths, right? These are things that tend to tap into our parasympathetic nervous system, decrease our heart rate. The other message that comes from that parasympathetic system is like, okay, we're resting now. This is the time where we would be eating food. So eating the food, this is why sometimes from an emotional eating standpoint, why the act of eating can be so calming. Again, going back to the baby, like when the baby's upset, it gets nursed by the mom, and the act of sucking, swallowing, and eating the food stimulates the organs in the gut, being like, oh, there's food in here. That stimulates the parasympathetic response to be like, oh, we need to turn all of these digestive organs on to digest our food. And so that's also why if you're really high stressed, you tend to have more gut issues. So people who have IBS, people who have reflux, or just like in general, like upset stomachs, tend to be a little bit more higher stressed type of people. It's also often why people with food sensitivities feel better on vacation, because on vacation, you tend to remove a little bit of the stress and you're doing things that are more restful. So you're getting this parasympathetic response telling the gut it's okay to digest foods. And so you're tolerating foods better because you're actually digesting them better. And so that's sort of the relationship between the two nervous systems. They work hand in hand, but the trump card, the thing that like really is like regulating things, is our parasympathetic nervous system. But what happens, life gets us sort of in overdrive with the sympathetics because we add stress to our body, right? whether it's made up or not. It could be made up like worrying about finances. It could be made up about, like worrying about what somebody thinks of you. It can be that, or it can be stress like the act of working out. Like working out still is a stressor to the body, even though it's, quote unquote, like something to support our health as well. So it can be an addition of stress, or it can be simply that we're not doing the parasympathetic things. We're not having good social interactions. We're not taking the time to do full exhale breaths. We're not doing a lot of like personal grooming and things like that. And we are not like taking the time to sort of downregulate. And so that is sort of the relationship I'm talking about. But the body's ability to heal itself and recover lives in that parasympathetic response. Someone who has a good balance of sympathetic and parasympathetic is, when this is high, this shuts on when appropriate and brings it down. So it's actually kind of always ebbing and flowing, right? Like I can get stressed out, but then 10 minutes later, I can be calm. People who don't have that resilience in their nervous system tend to only be stressed out and have no ability to calm. Or they've been so stressed out for so long, they get burnt out, and then they're like too calm all the time. So there's like two sides to it. That's like as simple as I can sort of make it, but yeah.
But I think again, to me, it's like everything always goes back to that when I look at things for myself, troubleshooting for myself or my clients, because it's just sort of this unspoken thing where nothing against muscles and bones, but it's really what's dictating sort of that process of how we feel and how we respond to things, and sort of helps answer the question of what is an appropriate dosage of exercise or stress, right, and what is an appropriate dosage of rest and recovery. Because people who spend, as you said, too much time kind of down low, they can't handle, they're not purposefully stressing, let's just say, their physical system and therefore their nervous system. So if something happens, then it's like, it takes them out. And that's, in my opinion, one of the reasons why strength training is so valuable, right? It's a thoughtful way to do that. But you also, you need to be able to get up and come down. Yeah. And depending on most of us, at least in our mental state, are way too high up, whether or not our physicality is up or down. And so I think people need to, like, rather than think about like, how do I train like an athlete? I think a much smarter conversation to have is like, what is the state of my nervous system and what inputs does it need?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's not super black and white always on what you need for your nervous system. And it can be hard, but understanding a little bit of like all the aspects of it allows you to sort of troubleshoot and see what's best for you, because there is times that I have found that people who are like that very sympathetic nervous system driven, it's like sometimes if you have that fight or flight response without your body actually mobilizing, it's not so good. So sometimes the best thing for somebody who's really stressed is movement, because it is this mobilization of this energy that is dictated towards fight or flight. And so that can be actually really helpful for someone who is super sympathetic to actually bring that resiliency back. And then often, especially again, this is why I love strength training, is strength training more than cardiovascular exercise allows you to really neurally fatigue your body, which the great part is then sort of forces the rest. Like when I first started getting back into strength training, it was like so wonderful to just feel the tiredness of my body and the drive to want to take a nap on the days that I strength trained. And that was because I was a little out of balance, but I needed something to mobilize my system. But then that mobilization moment gave the other stimulus this like ability to be like, okay, you need to take a nap. Right. And so not that nap's like the thing to do. It's just like, that's what my body was like, I'm like, can't get off the couch right now, sort of thing. Whereas other times, on my journey of healing my nervous system, after I sort of figured out that piece, there was still this thing where I'm like, man, I know how to get into this parasympathetic state. And I'm almost sometimes too parasympathetic, and I do the mobilization of my sympathetic and I feel better, but like I'm still responsive. Like I'm not coming back into the balance very well. And that was the nutrition piece for me, realizing that I was significantly restricting my calories, and my nervous system just thought we were constantly starving. And so my nervous system came into so much better balance when I started to feed myself more. And that was like almost the most primitive like approach of like, step one, survival. And the key to survival as a human is like, are you eating enough calories? And so it's like I was skipping that. And so again, like I said, there's not like a perfect way to really know what you need, but there's a lot of things that you can sort of check the boxes of what you're doing and seeing how your body responds. And there are ways to measure your state of your nervous system resilience. The resting heart rate is an easy one and a very accurate one. And then your heart rate variability can be another great number to track, though it's a little bit harder sometimes to troubleshoot with, I've found. And then also there's a questionnaire that Stephen Porges has. He's like the founder of the polyvagal theory that basically looks at, it's like a questionnaire of assessing how much autonomic reactivity you have. So that's sort of an easy way too, like how, what are feelings, what are you feeling like? How tired are you? How motivated are you? How much digestive discomfort do you have? Do you have a hard time coordinating your breath and coordinating talking? These are all like signs of your nervous system being out of whack. And so that's a great resource as well. That's actually what I use in my mentorship and with my athletes as a body perception questionnaire is what it talks about.
Yeah. And I mean, I think, again, so many good points there that are important for people to think about, which is sometimes, again, you need that stimulus and sometimes you need rest, but there's a lot of, as you pointed out, there's a lot of pieces. There's an exercise piece, there's a recovery piece that might be breathing, right? Or just like turning off your brain or figuring out like how to like minimize a stressful situation. There's a nutrition piece, which is like really complicated. And I think we sort of tend to, again, oversimplify nutrition where it's like we turn it into a calories in, calories out, or clean foods versus, or whole, whatever that is. Right. And it's like, there's so many pieces in the nutrition conversation. I won't take us down that rabbit hole because this will become a 4-hour podcast, but right. These are all different inputs that I think are important to consider. And I think also, even once you sort of have figured out the dosage, something that's important for people to consider is sometimes your body doesn't care and you have to sort of go with whatever happens. Like the easiest example that comes up for me is last week, I only ended up doing one strength training session because I switched the type of programming I was on, and the adaptations were enough neurally. It was different enough that I was sore for an extra 48 hours. And I was like, I could strength train, but this isn't actually going to make me better. This is just going to make me feel crappy. I should just wait until I'm recovered before I do the next session. And I was like, letting that one go. And it wasn't about being lazy. And it wasn't because I felt terrible, but I could tell that like, I was like, I need more time.
Right.
And so you just take more time, and that can be really hard if you're like a regimented person, you know what I mean?
It can. And then with like, again, like all the society rules that are like labeling people as like being lazy for not getting through their workout. But it's like that, like, who cares? Like we have nothing but time. Like, what are we in a hurry for? We literally have no football game we're playing on Sunday. Like what is the weird constriction of time that people feel like they need to be a certain way in a certain time? And that is like the crazy part to me. And then it's all a practice in like self-trust, learning how to listen to your body and learning how to listen to these cues to sort of adjust and adapt. And that is ultimately the issue, is like we've outsourced the trust in our body to so many other professionals over the years. Like we don't know how to listen to our body. And so it is a journey in itself to even get to the point that you were at, to be like, maybe I shouldn't train. And like, why? Like, there's no big deal skipping a day. So that's a little bit of the challenge too. So the other thing too, I want to touch on, just because I don't think I did in the nervous system piece, like one of the things that we can also do to support the rest part of things is learning how to feel better in our body, because if we can learn how to, and this also supports the self-trust, like if we can learn how to feel, and I mean feel like touch and like awareness, not necessarily feel like emotions, so that's part of it. The more we can give information to our body that we are safe, the more that parasympathetic response happens. And so that's really what we're always trying to do, is like create this sense of safety in our body. And the sense of safety helps to keep our nervous system resilient. And so an easy way to start to tap into that is to do work with the things that are innervated by the cranial nerves. So some of the stuff that I was giving of the co-regulation, that those are parts of our body that are innervated by our cranial nerves. So we have 12 cranial nerves, and we can just like easily, like these would be like considered like hacks that you can do to tap into this nervous system down regulation. It's like rubbing your skin, pulling your hair, rubbing your ears. It's like doing like shoulder mobility, like shoulder shrug is actually cranial nerve 11, a really important one to help our parasympathetic nervous system. And so there are things like that you can do, as well as like spending time barefoot and touching interesting surface in your feet. And same thing with your hands, like using your sensory organs to sense. And then that, because we are sensory beings, that's how we determine our output, is how much sensory information we have. So with that said, when you couple that with taking a second to do a body scan and just pay attention, like spotlight your attention on different parts of your body and receive some of that input from your sensory organs, this is how you start to cultivate trust in your body again, is to like specifically spotlight attention in certain parts, do an intervention, and then re-spotlight that area and decide if it changed. And if it changed, did you like the change or did you not like the change? Right? That's how we get smarter and get to the point that you were in your body being like, I don't think I feel ready to train again this week. I need more days off. And then you make that decision and move on. And that's like every little decision we make like that starts to give us our body agency and body ownership back.
Yeah. And it's not an easy or a simple or a streamlined or a straight, it's just, it's a process. For me, it's been like a 20-year process to be able to get to the place where I don't have to be a head case, where I'm like, this makes sense. I can just take a day off, moving on. And it's just like no drama, but there's so much that goes into it. And what you're talking about here again is like, this is the stuff that actually we need, that makes us feel better. That like when people feel like they're spinning their wheels and their goals and all of these things, or they're troubleshooting pain, or like all of this stuff, you know what I mean? They're like, I don't know why I feel so terrible. It's like, this is the stuff, is unsexy as it is, that's so helpful. And it's so far away from this idea of what training and athleticism is associated with on a commercial level, back to kind of the start of this conversation where you were talking about things like Michael Jordan and the shoes. And so much of it is like, have an athlete's body and the aesthetics and everything we've said in like the past 50 minutes. It's like, none of this is happening for aesthetic purposes.
Yeah. No.
Or health most of the time if they're an athlete.
Yeah. And the work to get there is not sexy. It's hard. It's like facing a lot of your like quote unquote demons of like not feeling worthy or good enough. And like, it's hard. And it takes work, and it takes like a conscious decision to want to like take that step back and like reconnect with your body and like really feel good inside of it. And feeling good inside of it physically also comes with the emotional piece. It's hard to feel good emotionally if you don't feel physically good, and same vice versa. It's hard to feel physically good if you don't feel emotionally good. And so it's like, it is a journey that you have to take slowly, and and it's not easy and it's not perfect, but it's like so much worth it. And like, I think that's the other thing too, that people don't get, that athletes go through. They have the same things that we have. I promise you, every athlete that you think looks amazing and performs amazing, they look in the mirror and struggle with thinking that their work, like that they have any worth. Like they struggle to think that they look good. They don't think their body looks good either. Like they're just as human as the rest of us. And it's sometimes even harder for them because they have people like openly attacking them on a regular basis on social media about them and their body and their performance. And it's like, at least the only person attacking me most of the time is the little voice in my head. The athletes have thousands and millions of people doing it, plus the little voice in their head that gets louder and louder with everybody else adding to it. And so it's like give them some slack a little bit. And then also, like, why are we trying to be like them? They're just like us. They are literally just like us. Like they're struggling in the same ways we are. They just have a different reward for the risks. And so their risk versus reward choice is totally different than our risk versus reward choice when it comes to training and what we do with our bodies.
Yeah, but I think it's so interesting. I think that there is a cultural shift happening in this conversation around athletes because, like, I'm sure you watched it too, like Simone Biles stepping back, right, during the Olympics. And I was like, yes, I was like, these are the conversations we need to be happening where they are human beings who their feelings and their physical and mental and emotional health and safety matters. And I thought it was fascinating and horrifying how many people thought that these athletes owed them something. But at the same time, I was like, but also when we see people modeling this idea of taking care of themselves, which is not modeled to us in general, I was like, this is really powerful. And I just thought that was the moment that I was like, I think this narrative is starting to shift, was when that happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel terrible for them having gone through it, but it like good for them being brave enough to speak up because and that's like the beauty. Like sometimes people are like, why do you like working with professional athletes? And like, what do you see, the sort of like the dharma of it, right? Like what's the big picture of like my purpose? Like, what am I giving to the world by working with the athletes? Like working with these really privileged people who have a ton of money, like what am I getting out of it? But that's what I'm getting out of it. The more I can make them feel at home in their body, they have huge platforms to put that out in the world, way bigger platform than I do. And so it's like, I am driven so much by what they give to their families and their communities after they're an athlete than I am keeping them on the field. And after they're an athlete, I want them to feel as good in their body as ever, better probably than when they played, and like mentally connected to it and like loving it and like honoring it, because then they're going to be more likely to share how to take care of that, like how to take care of yourself with the world. And so like I love seeing that, because I'm like, this is why I work with professional athletes, because they have such a platform to be able to do so much good in the world. And a lot of them already do a lot of good in the world. And like, the more I can make them feel good in their body, just the better off it's going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think that this type of nuanced conversation is really the way that we should be looking at things. Granted, I'm of course biased in my own right for that, but I think everyone is better off when we start thinking about these things of, again, self-care, and as you pointed out, risk versus reward and genetics. And there's so many factors that go into it that I don't think we're usually thinking about when we see the shoe ad.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
The shoe ad's just not telling us that much. We're kind of nearing sort of like that stopping point of the hour, if you will. Again, maybe we need to do a part 2 about the nutrition thing, because I think that's another one that people, there's a lot of confusion in the world about that, but we'll save that one for another day. But is there anything that we didn't kind of cover in the scope of today's conversation that you sort of wish people knew, or you think would be helpful for them to know?
Not that I can think of. I feel like we did a pretty thorough job talking about it, and just like, ultimately being like, as much as sometimes when we talk about the nervous system, it gets a little confusing for people, and it's like hard to understand, and it seems like really complicated, and it can be, but at the same time, it's actually pretty dang simple from a practical approach of how to change it and how to tap into it, and like the things that you can do to optimize and balance your nervous system are like way easier than describing what your nervous system is.
Yeah, that's why I like teaching movement as opposed to trying to teach how movement works sometimes, is because teaching movement, like doing the thing, is much easier than explaining the thing when it comes to the nervous system. I'm with you there.
Absolutely. So yeah, there's a lot we can do. And then most of it is just like try something, see how it feels, and then take that information and move on. Like there's not a right way. There's a way. And it's just, you got to continually check in with yourself and your body and know if it's the way for you that day.
Yep. It's very test and learn. So for people who want to connect with you, find you on social media, I know you do mentorship for other coaches and teachers, that sort of thing. Where are sort of the best places for people to connect with you and learn about your work?
Yeah. Instagram is probably the best place. And it's at Movement Rev, all one word, REV at the end. And comments or shoot me a DM. I love talking to people in the DMs. You can also sign up to be on my email list. That's always a great way to keep in touch, especially if social media were ever to go away. And then I have a website, www.movementrev.com. So I keep it consistent across the board. But I do have an online mentorship program for people, sports healthcare professionals or practitioners. And in 2022, we'll be doing more online courses like that are a little bit like shorter, lower cost as well. So just continuing to share. That's what it's all about.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's a wrap. Thanks so much for listening. If you haven't already done so, please consider leaving the show a rating and review over on iTunes. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Catch you on the next one.